established in 1999 to promote intercultural understanding between countries' local and international residents through various kinds of projects and programs. The weekly GICTALK is one of them, and every week the volunteer speakers share the knowledge about history, culture, politics, and so on with so many listeners. So it is really wonderful that the GICTALK have been happening since 2003 with willingness and support of so many volunteers. So for better GICTALK, please check your cell phone and switch into silent mode. Yeah, thank you. Today's GICTALK is all about Hansen disease in Korea. When you imagine this disease, what kind of things come to your mind at first? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you ask me, I would say Seoul Island. This is the place where many Hansen disease patients were captured under the control of Japan and treated as a subject for medical experiments. So I think it is quite miserable and very sad historical fact in Korea. Likewise, many Hansen disease patients suffered from the discrimination just because they have that disease. So from now, we are going to talk about this matter more deeply with today's speaker, Joji Kohjima. So let's welcome him with a big hand.
One of the cultural legacies of Hansen's disease. So in the video, you can see that the Hansen's disease patient is a caricature. I think there's two ways to look at this video. If you think about, in America we have a thing called minstrelsy, minstrel shows, and that's those are like blackface shows in which they're about black people, and the minstrel is a caricature. And in a similar way, the Hansen's disease patient is a caricature in this video. He's kind of a symbol. He doesn't really. And then the other way to look at it is it's a pre-modern view of how they saw Hansen's disease as kind of a cultural staple, a cultural character. So with that, yeah. Then we're going to look at like modern Korea and how Hansen's disease has changed over time. How views of Hansen's disease have changed over time. First, I want to thank my research affiliations and talk a little bit about my methods. I also want to thank GIC for hosting me here. And also Fulbright Korea and the Hanmi Educational Foundation gave me a grant to study for 10 months. So of course without them I couldn't do this. And also Seoul University Department of Sociology. Dr. Gwangju is a national leading scholar on Hansen disease. Jeonnam University 518 Memorial Hall is currently doing research on Hansen disease and sociology. Catholic University has an ongoing mobile clinic, which I also participated in that. And right now I'm staying at Aeonwon Hospital in Yosu, so they're helping me with my research, and I'll move to Soroko next month. These are all different projects that I've been kind of observing and working with in the field. Hansen's disease. So what is Hansen's disease? Leprosy, Hansen Byung, Nabyung. It's a bacterial disease from Mycobacterium leprae, and it was discovered in 1873 by Gerard Hansen. People often ask, can you catch Hansen's disease? Is it contagious? And the answer to that is fairly complicated, but the answer is that it's very hard to catch, and it's essentially not contagious. Whether or not you can catch it depends on genetic factors. So even though there's a bacteria and it is technically contagious, it's not highly contagious. And that's important because the idea of isolation of Hansen's disease patients, of isolation and quarantine is not based on scientifically sound theory. So quarantine was actually never effective for treating Hansen's disease. These are different cases of Hansen's disease. So a small percentage of the population will have what's called leptomatous leprosy, which is no immunity to Hansen's disease. These people, if you have no immunity to Hansen's disease, you can show symptoms like these at the bottom, and these are very severe cases. These are, by the way, all the photographs in this slideshow are photographed in the early 20th century by some missionaries. Some of them were Dr. Robert Matthew Wilson, and some of them were just in possession of Dr. Matthew Wilson. So these are all patients at Aeon 1, and here's a before treatment and after treatment shot. These are taken from Aeon 1 Yeosawan Historical Museum. Here's a patient where you can see he doesn't have facial disfigurement, right? But he has crippled hands and feet. So the other thing I want you to understand about Hansen's disease is that it does not physically cause body parts to fall off in itself. It attacks the nervous system, so it's a nerve and skin disease. And if your nerves in your hands and feet and your extremities die, then you lose feeling. You lose sense of pain and sense of feeling. So if you lose the sense of pain, you're gonna, if you pick up something hot, a cup of coffee, and you burn yourself, you won't know it, right? If you're working in the field and you cut yourself, you won't realize it. Or if you're walking all day and your toes get infected, you also won't realize it. So the loss of fingers on patients, which is extremely common, the loss of toes, is caused by the loss of nerves. It's a side effect. So I'm at Aeon 1 right now, which is an orthopedic hospital. So just this week we had a patient who had she had an amputation below the knee, and they took her leg below the knee, and she is a Hansen's disease patient, but she doesn't have any Hansen's disease in her body right now. she lost her foot because she had sprained her ankle because she has a nerve damage from Hansen's disease. So if you're curious about the medical pathology, the medical process of Hansen's disease, that gives you an idea. And that's all I'm going to say about the science of Hansen's disease as far as biology goes. Now we're going to talk more about sociological aspects of Hansen's disease. This is set some background. These are some more interesting pictures from Robert Van Wilson. Here's a picture of Dr. Wilson in surgery. This is a young boy he was born by a wild boar, right? And he has his intestines spilled out, so he's in the surgery room at Gulf. This is just some kids on the street, right? This is Lotiki, right? So these are just some of the images that the missionaries saw when they came to Korea. And I'm going to be talking specifically about missionaries that came to Jeollanam-do, right? So, so this story is, Jeollanam-do is very central to this story. So I wanted to point out that Jeollanam-do was a region of strong class divides due to the agricultural economy and the lack of land reform. So that played a lot into the kind of social atmosphere. So it was very receptive to both Christianity and to communism, which are both ideologies which emphasize radical equality. So you'll see how that plays into the story a little later. I'm going to start introducing some characters, right? This is missionary Wiley Forsythe. He came to Korea in 1904. 1906, while he was on the road, he was attacked by some bandits, or perhaps anti-foreign activists of some kind. And he returns to, so he leaves Korea for treatment, but he never fully recovered from this attack. He had massive head trauma, and he never fully recovered from that attack, but he came back to Korea. In 1909, he meets a leprosy sufferer on the side of the road, a dying woman, and he chooses to put her on his horse, and he brings her to Gwangju, where his friend Dr. Wilson, who you can't identify in this picture, but that's Dr. Wilson, was running the Gwangju Christian Hospital. So he brought her to Gwangju Christian Hospital, and Dr. Wilson was looking for a place to put her because he could not bring her to the actual hospital because the patients would leave if there was a leprosy patient in the hospital. So he put her in a brick kiln, a place where you bake bricks, and that's what this is a brick kiln. So this is kind of symbolic of the first structure of Aeon-1, of the hospital at Aeon-1. Forsythe, so I wanted to introduce him just so that we know that he was kind of one of the founders of what is now called the Wilson Leprosy Center. But because of his injury, he leaves Korea in 1910 and he dies in 1918. So Dr. Wilson was actually the person who stayed in Korea and continued to run Aeon Hospital. He was the person who actually stayed here and did the long work of running the hospital. So he came to Korea in 1907 with the Southern Presbyterian Church. Here's the same picture of him in the sistership. In 1910, he establishes a leprosarium in Gwangju, and the patient population increases very quickly. So in a moment, we'll talk about Soroko, right? I wanted to point out that, so Aeon-1 was the first major leprosarium in Korea. It was before Soroko, and it was much bigger than Soroko until the 1930s, right? So it was the main leprosy in Korea through the 1920s. And it peaked at about 1,100 patients. And it was moved to, it used to be right here at Gwangju Christian Hospital, if you know where that is. It's about 2 miles away from here. And it moved between 1926 and 1928 to Yosu. They bought a big peninsula where they could be a little bit more secluded from society, because in Gwangju there was a lot of problems with neighboring people not wanting to live next to Hansen's disease patients. So it was difficult to keep the hospital inside Gwangju. The moving process, I think, is very interesting because, of course, everybody had to walk on foot to Yosu. But because of their disabilities, it was very difficult for all the patients to walk from Gwangju to Yosu. So it was a very long process, and it was probably very difficult. And it said that they had to walk at night largely because if they walked in the daytime, they could be accosted, they could be attacked by people who didn't like Hansen's disease patients. So Dr. Wilson, he stayed until 1941. He was one of the last missionaries to leave, but he left before Pearl Harbor, so he escaped. He avoided being captured and leaving and being a prisoner of the Japanese. But he left in 1941. So he was here a total of almost 35 years. And he actually came back in 1946 after the World War II. These are some pictures. This is the Wilson House, right? It's about like 1.5 kilometers away from here, and you can go check it out. When I first came to Gwangju, this facade at the front was not built, so this is a new deck. It's pretty cool. And it's right up above Kyokgyeongwon Christian Hospital, right above the Eugene Bell Memorial Church. So if you're interested in going to see it, this is the 3 Wilson brothers in Yosu in 2009. Wilson had 7 children, and 4 of them are living. These 3 are all in their 90s, and they have a sister who's, I think, 102. So this is my grandfather, Robert Manton Wilson Jr., and here's his 2 younger brothers. They all became doctors when they came back to the States. They all went to high school in Pyongyang, which was where the missionary school was. So they all grew up in Gwangju, born and raised in Gwangju, and then went to Pyongyang for high school, and then went back to the States. So the missionaries, the missionary model of treatment. How did the missionaries treat Hansen's disease? Dr. Wilson, I think, he was he was really of the doctors that came to Korea at the time, he was a very skilled technician. He was a technician of moving people and of organizing people. So he had a lot of ideas about how to solve the problems of Hansen's disease patients. Hansen's disease patients largely, one of the biggest problems was unemployment and economic dependency. A lot of them were beggars and wanderers, right? So he was really keen on programs for economic independence for Hansen's disease patients. So this is a carpentry workshop, and these are all people who are apprentice carpenters, right? They're learning carpentry. This is a cobbler, so a shoemaker, right? He's actually making Japanese geta in this picture. I'm not sure if this person is actually a patient or not, but these are the cottage industries that were established at Ayeongwon to help them achieve more economic independence. They could sell their products to society and help them make their own living. They also built their own houses on the peninsula. This is a picture. This is a snapshot of one village on the peninsula in Yosu. These houses, there's a couple of them still standing. If you go to Yosu, you can see them still standing. 24 people would live in one of these houses, and they're 4-room houses with a shared kitchen. They're not very big, but it's better than being homeless. So 24 people per house. The peninsula, I'm sorry, I didn't bring a map of the peninsula, but it's a very secluded peninsula, and half of the peninsula was for women's quarters, and half of the peninsula was for men's quarters. So that it was secluded by gender, right? And so you had about over 1,000 people living there at its peak. And yeah, so you can imagine this village, right? Keep an eye on the time, I don't want to run over. Stigma and otherization. So these are some images of Hansen's disease patients. They were largely wandering around in Korea, right? Gangnam, Goshik, right? Begging and wandering in Korea. So they would largely, but when they heard of this hospital that was open in Jeollado, they would just come all the way from all over Korea and get treatment there. So here's some people, they're carrying their bedding. They're probably not admitted to the hospital yet. They're waiting outside to be admitted. And there was a large population of people who couldn't get into the hospital. They didn't have sufficient funds, and the hospital also didn't have sufficient funds. So they couldn't get into the hospital. So they would wait outside the hospital, waiting to get in. This is also a group of Hansen's disease patients, probably traveling beggars as well, right? This is a woman who you can see leprosy. You can see the lesions on her face. So just some statistics. In early 19th century Korea, about estimated at 100,000 to 150,000 Hansen's disease patients. So out of a population of about 20 million, right? This is a very big minority group. This is a very big group in Korea. Currently, approximately 20,000 people affected by leprosy are probably alive today in Korea. And if you think about it, Korea is usually considered to be ethnically homogeneous, right? One race. There's no minority groups in Korea, no ethnic minorities. But Hansen's disease patients essentially constituted a minority group. They were isolated, they were treated differently from society, they were the social other. Even though they're Korean, they were treated as almost less than human, kind of less than Korean, right? And what was it, leprosy? Yeah, so I wanted to also contrast between the physical symptoms of the disease, which are apparent in this picture, right? You can see the physical biological symptoms of the disease. But I want to point out that there's also social symptoms of disease, right? We can look at the poverty, which is apparent in this picture, and say that this poverty is a symptom of their disease in society. So the rise of the state model leprosy colony on Soroko. So before we're talking about the missionary model of treatment. The state model leprosy colony. So there's the private missionary hospital, which was established. And Japan was actually, so the missionary model of the leprosy colony was based on the American leprosy colonies in the Philippines, right? The Philippines was a colony of America at the time. And they kind of copied that idea and brought it to Korea. So Japan, at the time, they wanted to be seen as a modern country, a modern world power, right? And they looked at the American leprosy colonies with a kind of jealousy, because these colonies were a symbol of American benevolence towards their subjects, towards their colonial subjects. And Japan also wanted to be seen as a benevolent ruler of Korea. They wanted to be seen as a kind colonial power. So because of this jealousy, there was actually, this jealousy that I'm speaking of was actually a big impetus to create a state leprosy colony. And it was established in 1916, but this guy, Suho Masasue, Dr. Suho, he took over mid-1930s. And that's when Soroko started to become a very big hospital. He really expanded on the hospital. He really pushed for development of this hospital. And he wanted to use it as a symbol of Japan's benevolence, right? So he expanded in the 1930s. Population peaks at about 6,000 patients around World War II. So after the 1930s, Soroko overtakes Aomori as the main hospital. And they wanted to replace these missionary hospitals with state hospitals. They wanted to completely segregate all Hansen's disease patients in Korea. And they wanted to do this to show that they were a modern nation, right? So modernity is a very big factor in this story. The desire to be modern is what drives this plan of segregation and quarantine, right? So today, this is a picture of a bridge. This is actually the bridge from Nokdong to Soroko, right? So the Nokdong, right? So Nokdong on one side and Soroko on the other. And I took this photo. This is a graduate student at Jeonnam National University. The bridge was built in 2009, I believe, and there was somewhat of a controversy about it. People didn't really want to have a bridge connecting their city to the leprosy colony, right? Even in 2009. So that just kind of shows you some of the lasting stigma. This picture is also quite important. This is Dr. Suho. This picture was in possession of my great-grandmother, Dr. Wilson's wife. And on the back of the picture it says, "The man marked by the X was stabbed by an Innu." So I'm not sure where she got this picture. I like to think that my grandfather received it directly from Suho when they met in 1940. So Suho was eventually assassinated in 1942. We'll get back, and I'll talk about that again later. Hansen's disease literature, right? There's a, largely because of this guy, Han Hong, there's a big body of, or there's a kind of a, like a genre of Hansen's disease literature in Korea. And this is where I get a lot of my sources. So Han Hong, he was born to a rich family in Hamgyong-namdo in North Korea, North Korea. He contracts Hansen's disease in Manchuria, and his younger brother was a political activist who was trying to assassinate Kim Il-sung, so he was actually taken as a political prisoner in North Korea. He was vehemently anti-communist. He hated communism because he thought it turned people into mindless robots, right? And he was, so after being a political prisoner, he moved south in 1948 to South Korea. And he interned at Soroko until 1960. Interestingly, everybody knows the poet So-Eun. And So-Eun was first inspired by Han Hong. So-Eun wrote that when he was a teenager, he picked up Han Hong's book, and he thought, I want to be a leper poet, right? He wanted to be like him. So that's an interesting little side story. I want to tell you about Han Hong, though, that there's this kind of irony, right? That he was in North Korea, and he hated the totalitarian system of communism. But he escaped that system, and he was thrown right into, what to him was a system where he had no rights. He escaped North Korea because people didn't have any rights, but for him in South Korea, he also had no rights. He gained no rights by coming to South Korea as a Hansen disease patient. Here's a poem. I'm going to skip over. Well, I'll skip over these for now because we're running out of time. Other players in Hansen disease literature. Lee Sung-min published he was publishing an autobiographical trilogy, including Hyeolryok, which is the Bloody Tears Diary, and Aesengun, the Sad Heart. And he was going to publish a third book, but he didn't get the chance to. He was banished to Soroko. He was living in Eyangon, and he was banished to Soroko in 1951 as a result of a dispute with the church elders. He dies in 1960 on Soroko without finishing his work. And he's not well known. He also never received recognition as an author. Lee Chong-jun also wrote Hanshindure Chongguk. And so it's very interesting. I'm mentioning it because it depicts Soroko as a microcosm of Korean society. Microcosm, you guys know what microcosm means? It's a kind of small version of Korean society. So he looked at Soroko and saw all the problems that Korea as a larger society was facing, only magnified. And I think in my research, I've very much come to appreciate this view that Soroko, that the problems of the Hansen disease patients are kind of a microcosm, a small version of the problems faced in Korea throughout history. And I'll explain exactly what I mean. But first, here are the various kinds of human rights violations faced by Hansen disease patients. Forced labor, particularly on Soroko. Forced vasectomy. This was a national policy by the Japanese, and it was also enforced by the missionaries. So vasectomy, meaning Hanjong Susu, is they would vasectomize, they would sterilize male patients who they, if they were going to be married, they had to be sterilized. They didn't want leprosy patients reproducing. So this is totally unscientific because leprosy is not a genetically inherited disease, but it was just a way to keep the lower classes from reproducing. It was a totally it's purely an example of chabeol, right? Of discrimination, social discrimination. It's not scientific at all. Forced mobilization and quarantine, right? So they would keep them in these institutions and quarantine them there. And they also lived under religious hegemony, under Shinto and Protestant Christianity. So in Japanese society, Shinto was a forced religion. In Japanese colonial Korea, Shinto was forced on the people. But in the smaller societies of the Hansen's disease, of the leprosarians, Christianity controlled your everyday life in every way, right? Religion is an extremely effective way to control people, and an extremely effective way to make a harmonious society. But in this case, they received the Christianity passively, not actively, right? And they had to convert. To this day, most patients are Christians, so they really didn't have a choice, and this had consequences. The church elders were all powerful within the leprosarians. And lastly, red baiting and crushing of protests. Red baiting is an English term, like when you call somebody Bageni, and then you use that as a reason to persecute them, right? So red, like Ageni, and then you politically persecute. And crushing of protests. So what do I mean by crushing of protests? There was a lot of rebellion and demonstrations by the Hansen's patients over the years. These are just a list. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the incidents which I came over in my research. 1934, arson at AM1 Church. So 4 people were convicted of arson at AM1 Church. And this is kind of glazed over in the history of AM1, but it was a symbol, it was an indicator that there was political unrest there. Not everybody was happy at AM1. And so they were exiled to Soroko. This is kind of telling, right? Soroko was the Japanese colony, and usually as punishment at AM1, they would usually just exile people to Soroko. Which goes to show you, Soroko was that much worse than the Christian leprosarcos. Soroko was much worse than the Christian institutions, because people had no rights there, and there was no effective treatment. I think I got about 3 minutes to go, so I'm going to try to hurry up a little bit. So there were 2 assassinations on Soroko. One was first Dr. Suho's assistant. Park Sun-du was killed by Lee Ki-jung. The next year, Lee Chung-sun assassinated Dr. Suho. He assassinated him with a knife, just as he was walking on the street one day. This was a big blow to the Japanese propaganda industry, because the Japanese painted Dr. Suho as a father figure to the leprosy patients. They painted him as a saint, and really he was a dictator on Soroko. In 1945, right after liberation, there was a demonstration on Soroko. It was crushed by the police and employees, the Korean police and the Korean employees. There was a massacre in 1948, also conducted by the employees of Soroko, in which 84 patients were killed. There were numerous massacres during the Japanese period. They were kind of ongoing. 1951, 43 accused communists were exiled from AM1 to Soroko. So this included the author I mentioned earlier, Lee Sung-min. He was among those exiled from Soroko, or from AM1 to Soroko. So, if you notice, this is the right after the Yosu rebellion, right? The Yosu Suncheon insurgency. So there was a big anti-communist atmosphere at that time. And in the aftermath of that insurgency, these 43 people who were basically not communists at all. They were just people who didn't agree with the church elders. They were banished to Soroko. Leprosy in Korea today. Right. So these are the statistics of leprosy in Korea today. About 14,000 registered cases, and about 11,000 are registered as disabled cases. 332 active patients actively receiving treatment. They probably might have some bacteria left in their body. Less than 10 new cases each year in Korea. So there's virtually no new cases. These are probably rediscovered old cases. 5,000 people, yeah. So of those 14,000, about 5,000 live in agricultural settlements, and about 1,300 live in institutions. There are 89 institutions in the country, one at Soroko and one at AM1. Okay, thank you. seeing here today, what I'm seeing here today, there's a movement for compensation from the government for human rights abuses. So 526 foreign patients got a claim, one a claim for compensation from the Japanese government. But there's 5,500 living patients who have claims ongoing with the Korean government. And only 1,000 cases have been confirmed. Well, basically, most of these people are not receiving compensation as for their damages. So that's an ongoing movement to get compensation and apology from the Korean government for post-liberation atrocities. So that concludes my GIC talk. Thank you all for coming. Oh yeah, and we're going to have questions from the volunteers.
Okay, now it's time for a question and answer session. So if you have a question, jot it down on a piece of paper. You can get paper from our volunteer right here. Raise your hand and we'll collect. And let's start. So the first question, I know your research is on Korea primarily, but do you know how many people worldwide today have Hansen disease?
Yeah, it's something like 3 million are disabled by Hansen disease. They don't technically have Hansen disease because, but they have ongoing disabilities as a result of Hansen disease. They don't have any bacteria in their body. But there are many people who do catch Hansen disease in India, Burma. There's a lot of population in Brazil. So many people are catching Hansen disease today, but they usually don't have severe symptoms because the symptoms take a long time to develop and the drugs work very fast.
So you said India and Brazil.
Yeah, India, Brazil, Burma are the 3 big.
Why those places?
So the Hansen disease spreads better in tropical climates. And also in poor countries, there's less medical assistance to eradicate the disease. And it has what's called a reservoir, where the bacteria lives, is very difficult to completely control. For example, I could have Hansen's bacteria in my body, but I don't show any symptoms, but I can still give it to someone. So that's one of the reasons that it's very hard to control Hansen's disease completely, even if we have drugs to treat it.
And this questioner says, I heard about a famous Hansen disease colony in Hawaii. Do you know anything about that?
Right, so the Hansen disease colony at Molokai in Hawaii was run by Father Damien. Well, it wasn't run by Father Damien, but it's famous because of a Catholic priest from Belgium went there and worked with the Hansen's disease patients, and he caught Hansen's disease and died there in Hawaii. So it's a very famous. He was a very famous kind of activist for patient rights, and he actually inspired Korean priest. Maybe somebody knows his name. A Korean priest that went to Sudan. And he passed away from cancer, but there was a Korean priest who went to Sudan who was inspired by his father Damien.
Okay.
Go ahead, yeah.
Let's see. Why did you decide to start studying about Hansen's disease?
Right, so the obvious answer is, so I wanted to study about my great-grandfather's history, but I also got very interested when I started reading about my great-grandfather. I noticed that even though I could read his stories, or I could hear about his stories from my family, it's very hard to get the stories of the patients themselves, right? So I was very curious about the stories of the patients. So I thought I could come to Korea and interview the patients myself. Because that was my original idea. And then I met up with Korean professors who are doing that right now. So that's how I came to study Hansen's disease. stigma is very common, right? It depends on the country, but stigma is very common. But in some countries, it wasn't historically that bad. A lot of places, stigma was not present before the establishment of Hansen's disease colonies. So this is one of the problems with Hansen's disease colonies. If you isolate people, that actually gives opportunity for stigma to occur, right? Before they're just sick people, and now they're sick people in a colony. And then they're easier to kind of feel as different. They're not in your community anymore. So that's one of the arguments that's made against isolation.
Are they treated particularly well in any certain countries?
So in the Philippines, also in Hawaii, when the Westerners first came there, they reported that they actually physically had to drag people away from their families. The families would keep their family members in hiding, and the communities would keep them in hiding. And the colonial authorities wanted to eliminate Hansen's disease, so they had to pull people away from their families. It's the same in Korea. If the Japanese authorities would find someone with Hansen's disease, the family would sometimes want to keep them in the house. They didn't want to isolate them, but they were forced to isolate them. So there's some different cases.
Okay. Is the disease fully curable today with modern medicine?
Yeah, so the treatment is antibiotics. There's a couple antibiotics, and it's treatable very quickly. You can get rid of the bacteria in your body very quickly, but as we talked about, the symptoms of Hansen's disease are not curable. They're permanent damage.
This person wants to know about leprosy during, I guess, the Bible time, Jesus time?
Right, so leprosy in the Bible is interesting. It was one of the reasons that that missionaries wanted to cure Hansen's disease in various parts of the world. But we think that leprosy in the Bible was not leprosy today. It's a different disease called psoriasis. So leprosy in the Bible and leprosy today is probably not the same disease. Good question.
And what are the details of recent human rights abuses?
Recent human rights abuses, right? So around in the so the Koreans continued almost all the Japanese policies regarding Hansen's disease through the 1960s. They continued isolation and even tanumsusu, right? Sterilization. So, but in modern times, there's just some instances of like, how do you say it? Discrimination, right? Because, for example, in 1996, there was some 3 children kidnapped in some area of Korea, and it was near a Hansen's disease village. So the police actually went to the village because of a rumor that the Hansen's disease patients had kidnapped the children. And this rumor is based on an old Korean myth that Hansen's disease patients will eat children, right? So they used this rumor as a reason to investigate the whole village, and of course it was a groundless rumor. But that's just one example of modern society in 1996, and they were discriminated against because of their disease.
And I think our last question today, this person just wants clarification.
Yeah.
You said Soun, the writer. They want to know, did you mean Bogun?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, someone works here, right? I'm talking about Golden.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. And I guess that finishes our Q&A session, so thank you.
Thank you for a great presentation, and we prepared the certificate of appreciation. So this will be given by Teacher Kim Young-gu, the director of the GIC.
Imagine I drank water and it went to my throat. While I drank the water, it went through my lens. That's why my voice gone. So when I was a primary school student, there was a rumor that you mentioned, the Hansen disease, leprosy will capture us and then take our liver quick. So I was in the countryside to walk to school about 4 kilometers. So when I was alone, I was quite alone, when I was afraid to be caught by leprosy. So I found that rumor still dying hard. So I did not know much about the human rights abuse at Eamon and Sorokto, even though I heard about rebellion from the people there. So you gave us more information about it. So it is in many ways revealing and informative to all of us. A letter of appreciation to Joji, Wilson, Kohjima, we would like to commend you for your outstanding support to Gwangju citizens as a guest speaker at the GICTALK on July 30th, Mr. Topic, Hansen's disease in Korea society. Thank you very much, and then we have to thank you for your great grandfather as well. Some small gift. I was also noticed that your talk was covered by newses. Gangnam-ilbo and GFN News. Gangnam-ilbo. My eyes are getting worse. And then Gwangju as well. They wanted me to mention this. Thank you again.
Once again, thank you for your great presentation. And from now, for those of you who know much about GIC, I will explain it briefly. The GIC is a local non-profit organization to promote intercultural understanding between countries' local and international residents. So if you'd like to learn more about GIC, or if you'd like to support GIC as a member or a volunteer, please feel free to our coordinators and volunteers wearing their name tags like me. And now, in the next GIC talk, Andrea and Trevor will talk about the EAP. It's kind of environmental awareness and education program. So actually, it will be the last GIC talk in August. It's because there is no GIC talk between the 13th and 27th. So please don't miss it. This kind of great opportunity. And the next, there is a Hansen festival on August 6th. So if you are interested in this festival, please visit our website and then click here and then register. But unfortunately, it is just available for foreigners, so please keep in mind that. And that is all I should say. And thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.
much.